Ethan Cole was not the kind of man who sought adventure. He preferred the quiet hum of his ship's engines and the predictable routine of delivering supplies to distant colonies. But on this particular trip, fate had other plans for him. Ethan was halfway through his journey when his ship's sensors picked up something strange. A cluster of objects floating silently in the void of space. At first, he thought it might be debris from a destroyed vessel or perhaps an asteroid field. But as he adjusted the scanners, the readings became clearer. It wasn't debris. It was ships, dozens of them, all dark and lifeless. Curiosity tugged at Ethan like a persistent itch. He knew he should ignore it. After all, abandoned ships in deep space were rarely good news. They could mean pirates, traps, or worse, things no one could explain. But something about the sight of those silent vessels called to him. Maybe it was boredom, or maybe it was the thrill of the unknown. Whatever it was, Ethan couldn't resist. He changed course and guided his small freighter toward the mysterious fleet. As he approached, the scale of what he was seeing began to sink in. The ships were massive, far larger than anything Ethan had ever encountered. There were cruisers, cargo haulers, even what looked like military carriers, all drifting aimlessly. None of them showed any signs of power. Their lights were out, their engines cold, and their communication systems dead. It was as if they had been abandoned in an instant, frozen in time. Ethan docked his ship onto one of the larger vessels, a hulking cruiser that looked like it had once been the flagship of the fleet. Its name, Asterisk, the Eclipse Asterisk, was painted in faded letters on its side. As he stepped inside, the airlock creaked open with a groan that echoed through the empty corridors. The interior was dimly lit by emergency lights, casting long shadows across the walls. Everything was eerily still, as though the crew had simply vanished. Ethan moved cautiously, his boots clicking softly against the metal floor. The silence weighed heavily on him, broken only by the occasional groan of the ship's aging structure. He passed rows of cabins, each one sealed shut. In the common areas, tables were littered with cups and plates, as if the occupants had left in the middle of a meal. Personal belongings, photos, journals, clothes, were scattered everywhere, untouched. It was as if the entire crew had disappeared without warning. In the bridge, Ethan found more clues. The control panels were powered down, but some of the screens flickered weakly, displaying fragments of data. With a bit of fiddling, he managed to bring up the ship's logs. A woman's voice crackled through the speakers, calm but tinged with unease. "Captain Laura Hayes, log entry 427, she began. "We've detected an unusual signal emanating from an uncharted sector. Command has ordered us to investigate. Crew morale is low, and tensions are high. I fear we may be heading into something we don't fully understand." The next entry was more frantic. "Log entry 430. The signal, it's pulling us off course. Engines won't respond. Equipment is malfunctioning. People are disappearing. One moment they're here, the next, gone. I don't know how much longer we can hold on." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been natural. The crew of Asterisk, the Eclipse Asterisk, had faced something beyond their understanding, and now Ethan was walking in their footsteps. He glanced around the deserted bridge, half expecting to see someone, or something, watching him. But there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence and the feeling that he wasn't alone. As he turned to leave, Ethan noticed a faint glow coming from a nearby door. It was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of light spilling into the corridor. His curiosity burned brighter than ever. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. What he found would change everything, not just for him, but for the entire galaxy. Inside the room, Ethan found himself staring at a wall of screens, each one displaying strange symbols and patterns that pulsed faintly with light. The air was colder here, almost unnaturally so, and the hum of the machinery filled the silence. At the center of the room stood a pedestal, and on it rested a small metallic object shaped like a sphere. It glowed softly, its surface shifting as if alive. Ethan hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. He had never seen anything like it. As he reached out to touch the sphere, a sudden surge of energy coursed through his body. His vision blurred, and for a brief second, he felt as though he was falling. Images flooded his mind. Alien landscapes bathed in hues of purple and green, towering structures made of materials he couldn't comprehend, and creatures unlike anything he'd ever imagined. They moved gracefully, their forms sleek and otherworldly. But there was more. Humans were there too, working alongside these beings, exchanging knowledge and building something extraordinary. Then, just as quickly as it began, the vision ended, leaving Ethan gasping for breath. He stumbled back, his heart pounding. What had just happened? Was this some kind of hallucination, or was the sphere showing him something real? Shaking off the confusion, Ethan decided to take the object with him. If it held answers, he needed to figure them out. Carefully wrapping it in a piece of cloth, he tucked it into his bag and left the room. The eerie feeling of being watched lingered, but he pushed it aside and focused on finding a way out. Back in the corridors, Ethan noticed something new. The ship's lighting had changed subtly, flickering more frequently than before. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, twisting unnaturally against the walls. He quickened his pace, eager to return to his freighter. But as he passed by another cabin, he heard a sound, a faint whisper, barely audible over the hum of the ship. It stopped him in his tracks. Ethan turned toward the source of the noise, his hand instinctively reaching for the utility knife strapped to his belt. The door to the cabin was slightly ajar, just enough to reveal darkness within. Against his better judgment, he pushed it open. Inside, the room was empty except for a single desk covered in papers and holographic projections. On the desk lay an old journal, its pages worn and yellowed. Curiosity got the better of him again, and he picked it up. The entries inside told a chilling story. Written by Captain Laura Hayes, the sane woman from the logs, the journal described the crew's descent into chaos. Day 12. More disappearances reported. Crew members claim to hear voices calling their names. Morale is shattered. I fear we've awakened something ancient, something we cannot fight. The next entry was even darker. Day 15. The signal grows stronger. It's no longer external. It's inside us. Some say it speaks to them, promising power beyond imagination. Others refuse to listen. We are dividing. I don't know who to trust anymore. Ethan closed the journal, his hands trembling. Whatever the crew had encountered, it hadn't been just a malfunction or a random event. Something intelligent and dangerous had been involved. And now he realized he might have brought part of it with him. The sphere in his bag felt heavier somehow, as if it carried the weight of everything he'd seen and read. Determined to leave the cursed ship behind, Ethan hurried back toward the docking bay. But as he neared the exit, the lights went out completely, plunging the corridor into darkness. For a moment, all he could hear was the sound of his own breathing. Then came the whispers again, louder this time, surrounding him. They weren't just in his ears, they were in his head, urging him to stop, to turn around, to stay. Ethan clenched his fists and forced himself to move forward, step by agonizing step. When he finally reached the airlock, relief washed over him. He sealed the door behind him and sprinted to his freighter, desperate to put distance between himself and the Eclipse Asterisk. As the engines roared to life and the ship detached from the cruiser, Ethan glanced back at the fleet one last time. The sight sent a shiver down his spine. The ships, once dark and silent, now emitted a faint glow, their windows flickering with light. It was as if they were waking up. Ethan didn't know what he had unleashed or what awaited him next, but one thing was certain: he couldn't face it alone. Somewhere out there, someone would have answers, and Ethan was determined to find them. Ethan's freighter drifted silently through space, the abandoned fleet now a distant cluster of shadows behind him. But the weight of what he'd seen and taken pressed heavily on his mind. The sphere sat in his bag, its faint glow visible even through the cloth. Every time Ethan glanced at it, he felt a mix of fear and fascination. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching him, waiting for something. He needed answers, but he knew he couldn't handle this alone. His thoughts turned to Mia Torres, an old friend from his days as a mechanic. Mia wasn't just good with machines. She had a knack for solving puzzles, especially ones involving technology. If anyone could make sense of the sphere, it was her. The problem was finding her. Maya lived off the grid, moving from one remote outpost to another to avoid trouble. Tracking her down wouldn't be easy, but Ethan didn't have a choice. After hours of searching through encrypted channels and old contacts, Ethan finally found a lead. A message from a trader mentioned seeing Mia near a derelict station orbiting a dead moon. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Setting a course, Ethan prepared himself for the journey ahead. Along the way, he tried to focus on the task at hand, but the whispers from the sphere kept creeping into his thoughts. They were faint, almost like echoes, but they carried a strange urgency, as if urging him to hurry. When Ethan arrived at the station, he found it exactly as described, half-ruined and barely holding together. The airlocks groaned as he docked, and the interior smelled of rust and decay. He moved cautiously, calling out Mia's name. At first, there was no response. Then, from the shadows, a voice spoke. "Ethan, is that you?" Maya stepped into the dim light, her sharp eyes scanning him suspiciously. She hadn't changed much since he last saw her, still wiry and quick, with a streak of grease across her cheek. But there was wariness in her expression now, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "What do you want?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I need your help," Ethan said, pulling the sphere from his bag. He explained everything: the abandoned fleet, the visions, the journal, and the whispers. Maya listened intently, her skepticism slowly giving way to curiosity. When he finished, she took the sphere carefully, examining it from every angle. "This isn't human tech," she muttered. "It's too advanced. Where did you say you found it?" "On one of the ships," Ethan replied. "I think it belonged to whoever sent the signal that lured them there." Mia frowned. "If this is alien tech, it's dangerous. You don't mess with things like this unless you know what you're doing." And even then, her voice trailed off as she turned the sphere over in her hands. Suddenly, it flared to life, bathing the room in a soft, pulsating light. Both of them froze, staring at it. A holographic projection emerged from the sphere, forming shapes and symbols that neither of them recognized. Then, a voice, deep and resonant, spoke in a language neither Ethan nor Mia understood. The words seemed to vibrate in their chests, carrying a sense of authority and power. After a moment, the projection shifted, showing images of planets, stars, and vast structures floating in space. Among them were humans working alongside alien beings. "It's some kind of message," Mia whispered. "Maybe instructions, or a warning." She grabbed a nearby tablet and began recording the sequence, hoping to analyze it later. As the projection faded, the sphere went dark again, leaving the room silent. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Do you think you can figure it out?" Mia nodded, though uncertainty lingered in her eyes. "I'll try. But if this is what I think it is, we're not the only ones who'll be interested. Someone out there knows about this tech, and they might not take kindly to us having it." As they packed up and prepared to leave the station, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Somewhere in the depths of space, forces far greater than either of them were stirring. Whatever secrets the sphere held, they were bound to change everything. And not necessarily for the better. Ethan and Mia didn't waste any time leaving the derelict station. They knew they were sitting on something dangerous, something that could attract the wrong kind of attention. As they powered up Mia's ship, a patched-together vessel she called Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, Ethan kept glancing at the sphere, now safely stowed in a secure compartment. The whispers were fainter now, almost drowned out by the hum of the engines, but he could still feel its presence, like a shadow lurking at the edge of his mind. They hadn't gone far when the alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the cockpit as the sensors picked up multiple ships approaching fast. "We've got company," Maya said, her voice tight with tension. On the monitor, sleep fighters appeared, their designs unmistakably military grade. They weren't just passing by, they were coming straight for them. "Who are they?" Ethan asked, gripping the edge of his seat. "I don't know, but they're not here to chat," Maya replied, her hands flying over the controls. She pushed the engines to full throttle, weaving through asteroids and debris fields to lose their pursuers. But the fighters were relentless, firing warning shots that zipped past the ship, close enough to make the hull shudder. A voice crackled over the comm system. "This is Commander Ryan Blake of Nexus Dynamics. Surrender the artifact and power down your vessel immediately." The tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Ethan's stomach sank. Nexus Dynamics wasn't just another corporation. It was a powerhouse, known for its ruthless tactics and cutting-edge technology. If they wanted the sphere, it meant they already knew what it was, and they weren't going to let anyone else have it. "We can't stop," Ethan said, his voice low. "If they get this thing, who knows what they'll do with it." Mia nodded, her jaw set. "Hold on tight." With that, she pulled the ship into a sharp dive, heading straight for a dense field of floating rocks. The fighters followed, their weapons lighting up the darkness with bursts of energy. One shot grazed the side of Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, sending sparks flying in the cockpit. Ethan grabbed a fire extinguisher and smothered the flames while Maya fought to keep the ship intact. "Got any bright ideas?" Mia shouted over the chaos. "There." Ethan pointed to a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. It was barely wide enough for the ship, but it might be their only chance. Mia didn't hesitate. She steered hard, squeezing through the gap with inches to spare. Behind them, one of the fighters misjudged the maneuver and collided with an asteroid, exploding in a brilliant flash. But the others kept coming. "They're not giving up," Mia muttered, checking the fuel gauge. They couldn't outrun them forever. An idea struck Ethan. "Can you rig the cargo bay to jettison?" Mia raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "A distraction," Ethan said. "We dump the non-essential stuff, overload it with power, and send it their way. Maybe it'll buy us some time." It was risky, but they didn't have a better option. Working quickly, Mia programmed the cargo bay to detach and rigged it with a surge of energy that would mimic a malfunction. When the timing was right, she released it. The fighters swarmed around the ejected cargo, scanning it for threats. A moment later, it exploded in a burst of light and heat, forcing the fighters to scatter. The explosion gave them the opening they needed. Mia plotted a random course, jumping into hyperspace before the fighters could regroup. As the stars blurred outside the window, Ethan let out a shaky breath. "That won't hold them off forever," he said. "No, but it buys us time," Maya replied, her hands still gripping the controls. "We need to figure out who we can trust, and fast. Because if Nexus Dynamics finds us again, we're dead." For now, they were safe, but Ethan knew the reprieve wouldn't last long. The sphere had already drawn too much attention, and there was no telling how far Nexus Dynamics would go to get it back. Whatever secrets it held, they were worth killing for. And Ethan and Mia were caught right in the middle. After the narrow escape from Nexus Dynamics, Ethan and Mia knew they couldn't keep running forever. The sphere was too important and too dangerous to stay in their hands without backup. They needed allies, people who could help them understand its secrets and stand against the corporation that wanted it so badly. But finding trustworthy allies wasn't easy in a galaxy where greed often outweighed morality. Mia suggested reaching out to Jack Monroe, a name she'd heard whispered among rebels and smugglers. Jack was a former soldier turned freedom fighter, known for his sharp mind and unshakable principles. He led a small group of resistance fighters who opposed corporations like Nexus Dynamics, targeting their operations and exposing their crimes. If anyone could help, it was him. Tracking down Jack wasn't simple. His team operated in secret, moving constantly to avoid detection. Using encrypted channels and old contacts, Mia managed to send a message detailing their situation and requesting a meeting. Days passed with no response, and Ethan began to wonder if they were wasting their time. But just as hope started to fade, a reply came through. Coordinates to a remote outpost on the edge of a dying star system. The journey was tense. Every flicker of light on the sensors made Ethan's heart race, fearing another ambush. When they finally arrived at the outpost, it was little more than a crumbling station surrounded by debris. The airlock opened with a groan, and a man stepped forward. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running along his jawline. This was Jack Monroe. "You're either very brave or very stupid," Jack said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Coming here with something Nexus Dynamics wants is a death wish." "We didn't ask for this," Ethan replied, holding up the sphere. "But we can't let them have it. Not after what we've seen." Jack studied the object carefully, his expression unreadable. "Show me." Over the next hour, Ethan and Mia explained everything. The abandoned fleet, the visions, the journal entries, and the attack by Nexus Dynamics. Jack listened intently, occasionally asking questions, but mostly staying silent. When they finished, he leaned back, rubbing his temples. "If half of what you're saying is true, this changes everything. Nexus Dynamics has been dabbling in alien tech for years, but nothing like this. They're building weapons designed to control entire populations." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. "That's why we need your help. We can't fight them alone." Jack hesitated, clearly weighing the risks. Finally, he nodded. "All right, you've got my support. But this isn't just about hiding from Nexus Dynamics anymore. If what you say is true, we need to expose them, to everyone. The galaxy deserves to know what they're planning." With Jack's help, they began decoding the sphere's messages. It wasn't easy. The symbols and patterns were unlike anything they'd ever seen. But slowly, fragments of information emerged. Blueprints for advanced technology, warnings about misuse, and hints of an ancient civilization that had once thrived among the stars. It became clear that the sphere wasn't just a relic. It was a key, unlocking knowledge that could reshape humanity's future, for better or worse. As they worked, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Nexus Dynamics wouldn't give up easily, and sooner or later, they'd find them again. But for the first time since discovering the sphere, he felt a glimmer of hope. With Jack's team behind them, they had a chance, not just to survive, but to fight back. And fight back they would. The resistance quickly became a hive of activity. Jack Monroe's team worked tirelessly, piecing together the information from the sphere while preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Nexus Dynamics. Ethan and Mia stayed at the center of it all, explaining what they knew and helping wherever they could. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the stakes were higher than anyone had imagined. Through the sphere's fragmented messages, they learned about an ancient alien civilization that had once wielded incredible power. This civilization had created technology far beyond human understanding, but it had also faced its own downfall. The warnings in the sphere weren't just cautionary. They were desperate pleas to prevent history from repeating itself. Whoever controlled the technology risked unleashing destruction on a galactic scale. Armed with this knowledge, Jack decided it was time to act. "We can't sit around waiting for Nexus Dynamics to find us," he said during a meeting with his team. "We need to strike first. Let's show the galaxy what they're really up to." The plan was bold. Broadcast the evidence of Nexus Dynamics experiments across every communication channel in the galaxy. If people saw the truth, saw the weapons being built and the lives destroyed, they would rise up against the corporation. But getting the message out wouldn't be easy. Nexus Dynamics monitored communications closely, and their enforcers were everywhere. To pull it off, they needed a distraction, a big one. Jack proposed hitting one of Nexus Dynamics' key research facilities, a heavily guarded station orbiting a gas giant. The attack wouldn't aim to destroy the facility but to draw attention away from the broadcast. While Nexus Dynamics scrambled to respond, Ethan and Mia would transmit the data. The mission required careful planning. Jack's team spent days studying blueprints, mapping routes, and testing equipment. They modified their ships with stolen tech, making them faster and harder to detect. Ethan practiced flying simulations until his hands cramped, knowing that even a single mistake could doom the entire operation. When the day came, nerves ran high. Ethan, Mia, and a small group of rebels set off toward the research facility, their ships cloaked to avoid detection. As they approached, Jack led a second team to launch the diversion, an explosive assault designed to look like a full-scale invasion. The ruse worked perfectly. Alarms blared as Nexus Dynamics redirected their forces to defend the facility, leaving their communication networks vulnerable. Back aboard Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, Ethan and Mia activated the sphere, using its energy to boost their signal. Lines of code scrolled across the screens as Mia worked to bypass firewalls and encryption. "Almost there," she muttered, sweat dripping down her face. Finally, the connection locked in place. With a deep breath, Ethan hit the transmit button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, images and data flooded the galaxy's networks. Blueprints of alien weapons, recordings of unethical experiments, and evidence of cover-ups stretching back decades. People watched in shock as the truth unfolded before their eyes. Protests erupted on planets and space stations alike, with citizens demanding answers from their leaders. Nexus Dynamics tried to shut down the broadcast, but it was too late. The damage was done. Across the galaxy, outrage spread like wildfire. Governments began investigations, and rival corporations distanced themselves from Nexus Dynamics, fearing guilt by association. For the first time in years, humanity seemed united, not by fear, but by hope for change. On board Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, Ethan and Mia shared a quiet moment of relief. They had taken a stand, and the galaxy had listened. But Ethan knew the fight wasn't over. Nexus Dynamics wouldn't go down without a fight, and the sphere still held secrets they hadn't fully uncovered. As they docked with Jack's ship, he greeted them with a rare smile. "You did good," he said, "but this is just the beginning. We've shown the galaxy the truth, but now we have to protect it." Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and determination. They had started something bigger than themselves, and there was no turning back now. The backlash from the broadcast hit Nexus Dynamics like a storm. Within hours, protests erupted on nearly every planet under their influence. Workers walked off assembly lines, citizens surrounded corporate headquarters, and even some of their own employees leaked internal documents to the press. The galaxy was watching, and Nexus Dynamics scrambled to save face. But no amount of spin could erase the truth. They had been exposed. Still, they weren't about to give up without a fight. Commander Ryan Blake, leading Nexus Dynamics' private military force, launched a counterattack. His orders were clear: silence the rebels, retrieve the sphere, and eliminate anyone who stood in the way. He assembled a fleet of warships and set a course for Jack Monroe's hidden base, determined to crush the resistance once and for all. Ethan, Mia, and Jack prepared for the inevitable battle. They knew it would be brutal. Nexus Dynamics had superior numbers and firepower. But Jack refused to back down. "We've started something," he told his team. "If we run now, everything we fought for will be lost. We hold our ground." The rebels fortified their outpost, setting traps and arming themselves with whatever weapons they could scavenge or build. Ethan spent hours modifying Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, adding extra shielding and equipping it with experimental tech reverse-engineered from the sphere. Mia worked tirelessly to boost their communication systems, ensuring they could coordinate during the chaos. Every member of the resistance played a role, knowing that failure meant not just defeat, but annihilation. When the attack came, it was sudden and overwhelming. Nexus ships descended upon the outpost, firing relentlessly. Explosions rocked the station as walls crumbled and debris filled the air. The rebels fought back fiercely, using guerrilla tactics to outmaneuver their enemies. Small fighters darted through the larger ships, targeting weak points and forcing them to break formation. Ethan piloted Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, with precision, weaving through enemy fire while launching counterattacks. Beside him, Mia monitored the battle, shouting directions over the comm system. "2 ships at your 6, she yelled. Ethan banked hard, narrowly avoiding a barrage of missiles. He retaliated with a volley of plasma bursts, disabling one of the pursuers. Amid the chaos, Ethan spotted Commander Blake's flagship, a massive cruiser looming above the battlefield. It was the heart of the assault, coordinating the entire operation. If they could take it out, the rest of the fleet might fall into disarray. "Jack, I've got an idea," Ethan said over the radio. "Distract them while I get close to Blake's ship." "Are you crazy?" Jack replied, his voice strained from the effort of commanding his troops. "That thing's crawling with defenses." "It's our best shot," Ethan insisted. Reluctantly, Jack agreed, ordering his fighters to draw attention away from Ethan's approach. As Ethan closed in on the flagship, alarms blared inside Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk. Enemy fighters swarmed around him, trying to cut him off. But Ethan stayed focused, dodging attacks and pushing forward. Finally, he reached the cruiser's hangar bay and deployed a swarm of drones rigged with explosives. The drones infiltrated the ship, wreaking havoc on critical systems. Inside the flagship, Commander Blake watched helplessly as his controls went dark. His crew scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. The cruiser began to drift, vulnerable to the rebel forces closing in. Seizing the opportunity, Jack led a final charge, decimating the remaining enemy ships. By the time the dust settled, Nexus Dynamics' fleet was in ruins. Commander Blake surrendered, his pride shattered along with his command. The rebels had won, but at a cost. Many lives had been lost, and the outpost lay in ruins. As Ethan stepped out of Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, battered but alive, Jack approached him. "You did it," Jack said, clasping Ethan's shoulder. "We struck a blow they won't recover from easily." But Ethan shook his head. "This isn't over." "Not yet." He glanced at the sphere, still glowing faintly in its case. There were still secrets to uncover, and dangers ahead. The victory over Nexus Dynamics was a turning point, but it wasn't the end of the fight. The galaxy had seen the truth, and the rebellion sparked by Ethan, Mia, and Jack spread like wildfire. Governments toppled, corrupt leaders were replaced, and people demanded change. For the first time in decades, there was hope, a fragile, flickering light in the darkness. But Ethan couldn't rest. The sphere still weighed heavily on his mind. Its secrets weren't fully uncovered, and he knew that whatever knowledge it held could shape humanity's future, for better or worse. With Maya's help, he continued to study the artifact, piecing together fragments of its messages. What they found astonished them. The sphere wasn't just a relic of an ancient civilization. It was a map. It showed the locations of other artifacts scattered across the stars, each one holding pieces of technology and wisdom left behind by the aliens who had created it. These artifacts weren't weapons. They were tools meant to guide civilizations toward peace and understanding. But if misused, they could also bring destruction. Ethan realized that humanity stood at a crossroads. If these artifacts fell into the wrong hands, the consequences would be catastrophic. "We can't let this happen again," he told Mia and Jack. "If we find these artifacts, we have to protect them." Jack agreed, though he knew it wouldn't be easy. "This is bigger than us," he said. "Bigger than the rebellion. We'll need allies. People who believe in what we're doing. Together, They began reaching out to others who shared their vision. Scientists, engineers, philosophers, and even former enemies joined their cause. Slowly, a coalition formed, not to conquer, but to learn. Their mission was clear: locate the artifacts, safeguard their power, and ensure they were used for the good of all. As months passed, Ethan led expeditions to distant planets and uncharted systems, following the sphere's guidance. Each discovery brought new challenges, but also new insights. They encountered remnants of the ancient civilization, ruins filled with art, writings, and machines that seemed almost alive. Through it all, Ethan felt a growing sense of responsibility. He wasn't just exploring the past, he was shaping the future. Back home, the galaxy was changing. Corrupt corporations crumbled under public pressure, and new governments rose, committed to transparency and cooperation. People looked to Ethan, Mia, and Jack as symbols of hope, ordinary individuals who had dared to stand against tyranny and ignite a revolution. But Ethan never forgot where it had all started. On quiet nights, he would sit alone, staring at the sphere. It reminded him of how far they'd come, and how much farther they still had to go. The whispers were faint now, almost comforting, as if the sphere itself approved of their journey. One day, as the coalition prepared for another expedition, Maya asked him, "Do you think we'll ever finish? Ever truly understand everything?" Ethan smiled, looking out at the stars. "Probably not. But that's okay. The universe is full of mysteries. Our job isn't to solve them all. It's to keep asking questions." And so, Ethan set off once more, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Humanity's path was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like a path worth walking. Together, they would step into the unknown, guided by curiosity, courage, and the hope of building something greater than themselves.